it transcends so many different periods of not only his life but international conflict throughout the 20th century. So just to start, just to say, when Charles Chaplin first appeared on screen in February 1914, he would be completely unaware that within 6 months his native homeland of Britain would find itself embroiled in one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century. If Chaplin were alive today, he would look upon this joint anniversary with a little dark irony. It was, after all, a period that would mark the turning point for many aspects of his career, most notably his public persona versus his own political mindset. A young boy born from the poorest parts of South London now watched his homeland go to war with thousands of miles away, stood in front of a motion picture camera. For many, this is where he should have been, keeping up the morale of his country during its darkest times. For others, however, this was not the case. Between 1915 and 1917, Alfred Harmsworth, Lord Northcliffe, an outspoken member of the Fleet Street elite, used his influence and publications to personally attack Chaplin and his apparent refusal to fight alongside his fellow Englishmen in the trenches of France and Flanders. Chaplin had gained worldwide celebrity status in a time when celebrity, much like globalised mechanisation and industrial warfare, were all new concepts in a world struggling to adapt past Victorian and Edwardian principles and values. To Northcliffe, Chaplin, his art and fellow comedians, entertainers and actors were classic examples of an immoral profession that had abandoned the motherland in favour of wealth and fame across the Atlantic. They should be made examples of, attacked as cowards, and ultimately shunned to avoid promoting the notion that making financial gain is more important than national pride and support. However, this was not always as it seemed, like this presentation will hopefully demonstrate. Today, we see sensationalistic journalism as an almost unorthodox tradition in the blueprint of a Fleet Street journalist. However, many people during the Great War treated reporters and the papers they worked for as valuable and important resources to win the war. In 1914, Fleet Street contributed heavily to the propaganda that led thousands to sign up for the famous Kitchener Army. Yet by 1916, after such losses as the Battle of the Somme, and many journalists became disillusioned with the war and with those who supported it. Conscription created further unrest, and with Imperial Russia fell in 1917, it appeared that Europe would never be the same again. It is also arguably accurate to state that Chaplin himself would also bear these scars for many years to come. The power of the press is far from a new concept. Today we are familiar with the dealings of Rupert Murdoch and his newspaper empire. In the Edwardian Britain, this same image was projected onto another individual. Born into an aristocratic Irish family, Lord Northcliffe, Alfred Harmsworth, also known as First Viscount Lord Northcliffe, was a newspaper magnate and political figure whose influence spread far and wide throughout the empire. According to historian Robert Blake, Northcliffe's ownership of the Times, Daily Mirror and the Daily Mail, amongst others, allowed him to hold a great deal of influence over the classes and the masses. In an era before TV and radio, the Harmsworth domination of the press led to the extensive control in many other important areas of imperial social concerns. As Chaplin would become a pioneer in cinema, Northcliffe would become just as important regarding the press. On the 4th of May 1896, he began publishing the Daily Mail in London, which was a hit, holding the world record for the daily circulation until Harmsworth's death. Taglines of the Daily Mail included "The Busy Man's Daily Journal" and "The Penny Newspaper for the 1/2 penny." Prime Minister Robert Cecil, Lord Salisbury, said it was written by office boys for office boys. In 1899, Harmsworth was responsible for the unprecedented success and charitable appeal for the dependence of the soldiers fighting in the South Africa campaign by inviting Rudyard Kipling and Arthur Sullivan to write The Absent-Minded Beggar. Kipling would later become an incredibly important figure during the Great War himself, first in the support of the war and then later a disillusioned critic of the conflict following the death of his son in 1915. After acquiring influential status amongst his peers, Harmsworth was able to also found the Daily Mirror in 1903 and rescued the financially desperate Observer and the Times in 1905 and 1908, respectively. In 1908, he also acquired the Sunday Times. Harmsworth's upbringing was a far cry from the painfully underprivileged life a young Chaplin had endured in the slums and systems of one of Suffolk's poorest boroughs, Lambeth. At the tender age of 5, Chaplin was placed into a workhouse in Lambeth and then a boys' home in Hanwell, where he stayed until he was 9. His mother, Hannah, a musical artist, had succumbed to terrible bouts of depression and chronic mental health, which caused her to spend the rest of her life in and out of mental institutions, both here and in the States. Like his mother and father, Charlie was a born entertainer, and with the help and guidance of people such as Fred Karno and Max Sennett, he was able to flourish. As the outbreak of war loomed, Chaplin, at 25, he was not only one of the highest earners in Hollywood, but one of the most recognisable faces in the world. In David Robinson's definitive biography, you can read one of Chaplin's rare letters from this period. It was written after a meeting with Max Sennett to discuss his contract. Chaplin had announced he would require $1,000 a week. Sennett gasped, "Why, that's more than I earn myself, and I own the studio." Chaplin reminded him that if it was not for his name and the public lined up outside, he wouldn't have a studio in the first place. Here's the letter from August the 9th, 1914, 5 days after the outbreak of the European War. I'll read it to you because it's a little bit, it's for someone who came from very lowly upbringings, bless him, he had incredibly beautiful handwriting. My dear Sid, well, Sid, I've made it good. All the theatres feature my name in big letters. Chas Chaplin here today. I tell you, in this country, I'm a big box office attraction. All the managers tell me I have 50 letters a week from men and women from all parts of the world. Just to give you an example, by 1922, he would be getting 10,000 letters a week, as reported in Picture Play on the 22nd of May, 1922. It is wonderful how popular I am in such a short time, and next year I hope to make a bunch of dough. You will like it out here, Sid. It's a beautiful country. The fresh air is doing me a world of good. I've made a heap of good friends here and go to all the parties. I stay at the best clubs in the city where all the millionaires belong. In fact, I have a good, sane, wholesome time. I have my own valet, some class to me, what? I'm still saving my money, and since I have been here, I have $4,000 in one bank, $1,200 in another, and $1,500 in London. Not so bad for 25 and still going strong, thank God. Sid, we'll be millionaires before long. My health is better than I'd ever hoped it would be, and I'm getting slightly fatter. This is the bit for me that makes you realise that his heart never left home, when he says, "Now, about the money for Mother. Do you think it's safe for me to send it while the war is on? I hope they don't make you fight over there. It sounds terrible, Sid. Well, that's about all the important news. Your loving brother, Charlie." As Chaplin's fame grew, so did the desire to make money from his image. The idea of protecting one's own copyright had never been heard of before. In fact, a famous example of this is in May 1916, when through his lawyer Nathan Birkin, Chaplin acquired an injunction to halt the distribution of a film called A Burlesque on Carmen. He claimed he had not approved of the final cut and his author's rights had been infringed. The incident involved offcuts from various other Chaplin films, which were spliced together to make a weird and wonderful and totally unofficial new Chaplin film. Charlie was outraged. From this point, he started to sign all his films in the beginning to give it that Chaplin seal of approval. Unfortunately, Justice Hopkins found in favour of the S&A studios because they owned the rights to his films and also what happened to them. Charlie's fight over his public image had only just begun, and within a year he would again find himself arguing and struggling to hold on to his professional credibility. With the start of the Great Chaplin craze in 1915, fierce competition to secure interviews, serialisations, periodicals and biographies mounted across the globe. One particular journalist, Rose Wilder Lane, had interviewed Chaplin for the San Francisco Bulletin in March or April of 1915. The archives are not actually totally accurate on the date. No doubt Chaplin thought very little about the interview once he had given it. He was in such constant demand during this period that there must have been an element of robotics to his workload, and all interviews had merged into one. However, once the article had been run, it was sold to entrepreneur Guy Marsden, whose spin on it would turn it into an interesting and rather romanticised depiction of Chaplin's life. In short, a very early example of what we now call sensationalistic journalism. The work attracted the interest of New York publishing giant Bobbs Merrill, who decided to go ahead with the publication, thinking very little about its implication on the subject. I found this in the archive, which I wanted to read to you. On the 10th of July, we found a document that states that Bobbs Merrill sent through a telegram to Chaplin's press office stating, "We have accepted and shall publish as quickly as possible the story of your life. Can you send us photographs of yourself as a boy, your father and your mother and your brother, also of the studio in which you are now working? Any assistance will be greatly appreciated." Such little notice seems to have been taken of the importance of the document by the office that the photographs were actually supplied, adding credence to the authentication of the document, allowing Merrill to confidently follow on with the publication. In truth, the world wanted to read exactly what they were offering, and Merrill knew this. It seemed a bestseller was within their reach. But across the Atlantic by September 1916, he was having to take precautions in securing any further anti-backlash from Chaplin. He wanted to make sure that everything would run smoothly. But on the 20th, the rights for the book were sold by Merrill to no other than Lord Northcliffe, who had intended to use in his newspapers. However, Chaplin's older brother had got whiff of the idea, and he was now his manager. He was able to convince the judge that the publication was unauthorised. As a result, Northcliffe was unable to use the publication, which he had spent £100,000 in 1915 to release. It was from that point that the anti-Chaplin rhetoric in his publications first appeared. It is important to note that during my research on this topic, I found no anti-Chaplin propaganda in any of Northcliffe's newspapers before this point, and before the unauthorised biography by Rose Wilder Lane. There was no conscription at this time in Britain yet, and women used to hand white feathers to young men who were not in uniform. Propaganda portrayed such men as the lowest forms of human life, and a musical song became popular. "We don't want to lose you, but we think you ought to go." Many men joined up because they could not bear the humiliation. As Chaplin grew more famous, he was not only sent white feathers, but subjected to threatening letters and attacks in the newspapers, mostly those owned by Northcliffe. However, this is interesting here that this is only, like I say, where Northcliffe's papers are intended. However, there was a slight twist to this. The public's strange combination of affection and resentment expressed itself in a soldier's song, the parody of Red Wing. The lyrics go, "The moon shines bright on Charlie Chaplin. His boots are cracking for want of blacking, and his little baggy trousers, they need mending before we send him to the Dardanelles." Chaplin's reaction when he first heard this song was undiluted fear. As he told Alistair Cook some years later, "I really thought they were coming to get me. It scared the daylights out of me." In my work with the film historian Kevin Brownlow in 2014, in the centenary of The Little Tramp, we re-examined the lyrics of the song and concluded that this was not an anti-Chaplin parody at all, but indeed a tongue-in-cheek assessment of how useless a soldier he would be and how great he was at keeping them upbeat on the front line. In fact, in the Chaplin archives, there are many letters whereby soldiers have thanked him for his films. Some even sent him their medals, which the Chaplin archive still owns today. Robinson also notes that had he gone to the front, the British Army would have gained a recruit of indifferent physique and a doubtful value. but it would have lost one of the most influential and cheering moments in the misery and wretchedness of those nightmare days. The troops felt Chaplin was the best morale booster they had. A doctor in a neurological unit in France asked for signed photographs in his letters. He said, "Nearly everyone has seen your pictures. I will show a photo to a poor fellow and it may arrest his mind. He may say, 'Do you know Charlie?' and then begin the first ray of hope that the boy's mind can be saved." Chaplin sent the pictures and said the letter ranked amongst his most treasured possessions. In military hospitals, special projectors were installed so that Chaplin films could be shown on ceilings for men who could not sit up. A cinema manager said, "Last week I was showing a Charlie Chaplin and a wounded soldier laughed so much he got up and walked to the end of the hall and quite quickly forgot he had left his crutches behind. My assistant went over to give them to him and he said, 'That fellow Chaplin would make anyone forget his head. I've never laughed so much in my life.'" It has been alleged that the Germans were ignorant of Chaplin, that due to the British blockade, no American films reached Central Europe. This is backed up by Chaplin's statement when he visited Berlin in 1921. In contrast to the mobs that greeted him everywhere else, only one man, a former prisoner of war, who had seen his films in captivity, recognised him in a cafe, rushed over and kissed him. There is a rumour that Hitler cut down his walrus moustache to match Chaplin's because he wanted to be loved. This is absurd. Hitler thought Chaplin disgusting and furthermore a Jew, which he wasn't. The toothbrush moustache was popular among German NCOs at the end of the war. The Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces, Sir John French, ordered troops to stop growing Chaplin moustaches. It subverts the dignity of His Majesty's troops in the field. The fact that Chaplin became the best-loved personality of the war, he also became one of the richest, gave him a certain amount of respite. The British government cared no more for his artistry than that of the thousands of other actors, writers, poets and painters who served at the front. But he was a willing source of finance for the British government. For as long as they could use him in that way, they left him alone. In 1916, he signed for Mutual for more money than any entertainer in history at that time, $670,000 a year plus bonus. John Freuler, head of Mutual, said that more editorial space was devoted to this salary than anything except the war itself. The 20,000-word document included an element of war risk. Mutual insisted that Chaplin should not leave the United States within the life of the contract, without the permission of the cooperation. Imagine how that was received by the War Office. One can safely assume that the sizable slice of the $670,000 went to the British government. We've seen evidence of this in the archive. For such a clause would not have been legally binding without their assurances. He was still a British citizen. As stated in the LA Evening Herald, March 1917, Chaplin purchased a $58,000 block of Canadian war bonds and cabled $150,000 on the last day of the Win the War loan. In May 1917, Photoplay interviewed Chaplin's leading lady, Edna Purviance, who stated that he simply pours thousands of dollars into England to help the war effort. The war risk clause created an outcry in the British press. The Daily Mail had said, "We have received several letters protesting the idea of Freuler or any other American making a profit on the exhibition in this country of a man who binds himself not to come home to fight in his native soil." Nobody would want Charlie Chaplin to join up if the army doctors pronounced him unfit, wrote Northcliffe. But until he was undergone medical examination, he is under the suspicion of regarding himself as especially privileged to escape the common responsibilities of a British citizen. This thought may not have occurred to the much boomed film performer, and he will no doubt be thankful that an opportunity for reminding him has been presented by the course of events. Charlie in khaki would be one of the most popular figures in the army, Northcliffe carried on. He would even compete in popularity with Barnes' father's Old Bill. If this condition did not warrant him going into the trenches, he could do admirable work by amusing troops in billets. And here's a card from the Chaplin archives that Bruce Barnes' father actually drew for Chaplin of Old Bill and the Little Tramp. Interestingly, in 1926, Charlie's older brother Sidney, who himself was a performer, played Old Bill in the film The Better Role, as you can see here. Late 1916, Chaplin issued a statement to the press. I'm ready and willing to answer the call of my country like thousands of other Britishers, as he puts. I am awaiting word from the British Embassy in Washington. Meanwhile, I have invested $250,000 in the war activities of America and in England. I registered for the draft here. I asked no exemption or favours. I have been drawn. I would gone to the front like any other patriotic citizen. As it is, I shall wait for the orders from the British government through its ambassador in Washington. The embassy responded, we would not consider Chaplin a slacker until he received instruction to put the compulsory service law into effect in the United States. And unless after he refused to join the colours, then there would be an issue. Robinson also notes that Chaplin could volunteer any day he wanted, but he was as much used to Great Britain making big money, especially for the government, and subscribing to war bonds as he would have been in the trenches. Chaplin's motion picture activities were curtailed by his energetic campaigning for the Liberty bonds. This required a grueling series of personal appearances. There was no microphone or amplifiers in those days, so you had to project your voice, and even so, the chance of being heard by eager thousands was negligible. He and his close friends Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks practiced their speeches in Los Angeles schools before they went out to the public. In motion picture magazines, staff declared they are the most charming people you could have met. They toured big cities along with other stars, raising astonishing sums. One lady even donating $20,000 to the Red Cross for the privilege of sitting next to Chaplin at a gala dinner. So I've got a clip now from the Liberty Bonds tour. So let me know if it doesn't work, because hopefully it should come through. If there's no sound, it doesn't really matter for these. So just let me know if there's any problems. In July 1918, Chaplin signed his first national contract for $1 million plus a bonus upon signature of $15,000. On this occasion, the press hailed Chaplin as a national asset and suggested that if Chaplin's joining up would put an end to the terrible sacrifice, then only then should he enlist. With America in the war, the campaign against Chaplin became much more vindictive. His income could pay for the expenses of a whole company of soldiers for a year, reported photoplay in September 1918. If he went to a recruiting station and was placed in first classification, then it would be fine. But actually, he went to the recruitment station and was placed in the 5th classification of the draft, classed as unsuitable. He was rejected by an army doctor for being underweight. Once this was announced, the campaign abated, and a correspondent in England received a letter from Chaplin explaining the situation. I only wish I could join the English army and fight for my country, but I have received so many letters from soldiers at the front, as well as civilians, asking me to continue making pictures that I have come to the conclusion that my work lies right here in Los Angeles. At the same time, if my country needs me in the trenches more than the soldiers need my pictures, then I am ready to go. In 1918, a treaty was finalised between Great Britain and the United States permitting the drafting of British subjects' residents in America. 200 motion picture people in Los Angeles were affected. The London Times carried the news that Chaplin had been drafted and had waived his rights to exemption. A few days later came a report that Chaplin would abandon his British nationality and join the US Army in July. A national calamity, said the Bioscope. Photoplay, however, was doubtful on both counts, stating his chest is only 26 inches. To boost the Liberty Bond loan, Chaplin made a one-reeler called The Bond. It's a charming fragment of the Chaplin foolery, short scenes played against a stylised background of white cutouts, and was a common in review. It illustrated the bond of friendship, the bond of love, the bond of marriage, and the most important of all, the Liberty Bond. This is all that does survive of it, and it's only about a minute long, or 2 minutes long, sorry. That's actually Sidney Chaplin playing the Kaiser, which he does also go on and then do in another one of Chaplin's films I'm going to talk about in a minute. The estates never put music over this, which they did with a lot of things because they're very strict on how they present the Chaplin films. And Charlie wrote all his own music for all of his own films. When he was later on in life, he went back and re-edited a lot of them, and he never did this one because it was never. A lot of it was destroyed, which is a shame because I think in its entirety it would have looked pretty amazing. The quality is still amazing considering how old it is. It has been slightly digitally restored. Chaplin used to use different techniques to most of Hollywood because he owned his own studio. He didn't use nitrate film, which is another reason why so much of his stuff does survive, because nitrate is very flammable, and that's why so many films don't exist anymore. But he didn't. He was using celluloid from a really, really early stage because someone had told him it worked better, and that's why we can digitally restore his films really well. To boost, like I say, to boost the Liberty Bonds, Chaplin did make that one real, but it was also inevitable that he would eventually make a comedy about the war. But he was warned by D.W. Griffith, who he greatly admired, not to do so until the war was over. He started it under the title of Camouflage. He had been mulling over it for months. And when he was mulling over an idea, he could only do anything if he propelled himself into the situation. The film was eventually known as Shoulder Arms. There's his brother Sidney again. We've got inspiration from this for the better role. Incidentally, that was all filmed at the Chaplin Studios, and the scene in the trench was totally constructed in Chaplin's Olympic-sized swimming pool, which was then filled and with water, and then the water removed for different sections of filming the film. The public reaction to Shoulder Arms was quite impressive. However, Cecil B. DeMille suggested Chaplin delay the film before he'd released it because he said it was in bad taste. Charlie agreed. He'd have been exhausted by the whole production, and what with the Northcliffe saga, he really wasn't sure how this film was going to be received at all. He seriously considered even scrapping it until he showed it to his best friend Douglas Fairbanks, who found it historically funny. It proved to be the greatest success of his career so far, and the excitement was, on at least one occasion, so violent that considerably more than box office records were shattered. One of the photoplay magazines at the time suggested that 6 doors torn from their hinges, 7 lobby frames trampled to bits, a ticket box crushed beyond repair, a cast iron effigy of Charlie Chaplin battered to pieces, a special detail of policemen so badly bruised and manhandled that 2 bottles of Omega oil were used. Chaplin's was the only war film from the entire war to be remembered with unqualified admiration at the time. When Chaplin visited London in 1921, one ex-soldier wanted to give him his medals for all he had done for the men at the front. Charlie Chaplin was a true war hero, for his films did nothing but good, wrote another man. If you look at this image, you will see that considering Lord Northcliffe wanted people to believe that all of England, and London especially, thought that Chaplin was a coward, I don't see very many people in this picture, especially menfolk, who would have seen action on the front, turning round and calling him this. Northcliffe's attacks on Chaplin had not won him any friends. However, sadly, it had also cost Chaplin much, including a knighthood. Chaplin was turned down 3 times for the honour, once under George V due to pressure from Northcliffe, who by this time directed a mission to the new ally, the United States, during 1917, and was director of enemy propaganda during 1918. Again in 1947 at the heart of the McCarthy witch hunts and the Red Scare, and then lastly in 1952 on the eve of his trip to London for the premiere of Limelight, when it was decided that upon his return to the States, he would be made to go in front of the House of Un-American Activities Commission. He refused. His answer, I paid my tax for 40 years, I'll go and live somewhere else, which he did in Switzerland. It was not until 1975, 2 years before his death, that he was recognised by Her late Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II as Sir Charles Spencer Chaplin KBE. The rumour goes that Lord Mountbatten, a lifelong friend of Chaplin, who put pressure on the Queen via a young Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, was what was done to finally recognise him. I've no concrete evidence that this was true, but I would love to believe this story. This brings me to one final point. I would like to show you this picture of Charlie in Hanwell. It's taken in 1894, like I said, when he was 5 years of age, but there's one thing in there I didn't show you. Above him is a tiny little black-haired boy who looks lost and slightly terrified. This little man is the one I want to draw your attention to, which is the one that started me on my Chaplin journey. This is William Goodman, and he is my great-great-uncle. Researching my family, I came across this photo and discovered the connection. And from that point on, I wanted to know everything. And I wanted to know everything I could about Lambeth, my family, and Chaplin's life and how it influenced his art. From this, I went on the journey I am now on, via the Great War, through the Second World War, and currently researching his later life. The little London boy done good, the kid from Southwark, the kid from Lambeth, the silly walk, the twirling cane, the little tramp, and the really big war. Thank you, everybody. All done. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask me.
Thank you very much for that, Ayse. That was great.
No problem.
Especially the big reveal at the end.
I know, yeah. That's how it all started. But it's one of them things. It's how it all started, but it's so much better to leave it to the end.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously, I knew you'd got your Charlie Chaplin obsession. It never occurred to me to ask where did it start. But
yeah, it started. It didn't actually start. Weirdly enough, it didn't start like me just seeing a film and going, "Oh, that's really interesting." It genuinely started with me being just doing family research, and then I was told when I found a picture on Ancestry, it said that it wouldn't let me see the picture. I had to actually go through the Chaplin archive. So I contacted them, and I had no idea what they were. Very good. I mean, this is before I did any work with them, and they actually gave me a high resolution image, which is the one there is on that PowerPoint slide, and then I started looking into it, and I realised that there was a little Charlie Chaplin, there was my uncle, and it's really mad because we found pictures of my brother when he was little, and it's like freakishly, I'd like that you can see the family gene is incredibly strong, but it did make a lot of sense that his films were always being played, and people in like my mum always had his films on, my nan always had his films on, we always had the Gold Rush on at Christmas. So it's weird. It wasn't something that was massively known around my family, but I don't think it surprised anybody because there were so many stories of him in and around South London and meeting people. And every time he came back to London, he actually went back to his haunts and spoke to people and stuff. So I don't think it was a massive shock. They never kept in contact, my uncle and him. As far as we know, my great uncle went to Australia and that was it. We don't know anything else about him apart from one photo. But it got me thinking like how much his films were influenced by growing up in an incredibly poor working class family in Lambeth. And his mum is a real heroine of mine as well because she's such a sad, tragic figure. You can see that all the women in his films are one way based on her. You watch The Great Dictator. At the end, he says, "Look up, Hannah." He names Paulette Goddard's character after his mum. And also, she suffered from terrible mental illness when there was so much stigma. And she took her children to a workhouse and handed them in and said, "I can't look after them. I don't have the mental capacity to look after these children." So she handed them in because she knew if she didn't, they'd starve to death. That's incredibly powerful. And you can see why she made such a massive impact, to the fact that he's writing home to his brother saying, "Please keep safe in the war, but can you send this money to mum to look after her because she was being kept in she was in Cane Hill. Cane Hill doesn't exist anymore, but if you actually look on the internet, there's some amazing pictures of Cane Hill before they demolished it, and urban explorers went in and took pictures, and they've still got a lot of the medical, of the beds and things are there. It's intriguingly creepy before they demolished it. See you later, and thanks for being here. So yeah, it's amazing, really. But there's so much more I want to do. I want to look at him now. My next thing is I really want to look at him, what happens to him during the Cold War period. And I just think he's a really interesting character as a case study to international conflict from the First World War all the way up to through the Cold War. And I really want to
keep you busy for a while then.
Oh,
well, at this point, I'm going to turn the recording off, so we will